you guys wanted a deep dive on life after prison. And wow, the YouTube video with Darren Gee you sent is like intense. He really doesn't hold back.
Yeah, no, he definitely lays it all out there.
And it's really got me thinking about like what it's actually like to try to re-enter society after being locked up, you know? It's something we don't hear about a lot from the inside, you know, firsthand.
Yeah, exactly. You only get these glimpses.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're often pretty sanitized. You know, they're not always...
Yeah. Oh, totally. Like cleaned up for public consumption.
Right.
But this is raw. This is like real deal.
Exactly.
One of the things that really got to me right off the bat was when Darren said the hardest part of his sentence wasn't even being behind bars. It was like the aftermath, being out on parole. That was way worse for him.
Yeah, that's something you hear a lot, actually. And it makes sense when you think about the huge psychological adjustment it takes to go from prison, where everything is scheduled, controlled.
Totally regimented.
Yeah, to suddenly being thrown back into the world where you've got choices, temptations.
And responsibilities, too.
Exactly. And it's not like you get a handbook, you know? And on top of that, you've got parole officers breathing down your neck, the constant fear that one slip-up lands you right back inside.
It's like this pressure cooker situation.
Yeah.
And Darren talked about that pressure, about constantly being tested, feeling provoked, but not being able to react the way he might have before, you know?
Right. There's this whole, like, repressing your old self thing going on.
It just sounded, I don't know, almost soul-crushing.
And we can't forget the lack of support for people coming out of prison. Trying to find housing with a record is tough enough, let alone a job. And then you add these internal struggles into the mix. It's no wonder reintegration is such a struggle for so many.
And another thing that kind of blew my mind was how much the world changed while Darren was inside for those 12 years. Like, 12 years, that's huge GE.
Yeah, talk about culture shock, right?
Seriously. I mean, he was even talking about just, like, figuring out smartphones and Wi-Fi, things we don't even think twice about.
Oh, totally.
I can't imagine trying to catch up on a decade's worth of tech, like, let alone everything else.
Well, that's exactly what we're talking about with cultural lag, right?
Yeah.
It's that disconnect you get when someone's been isolated from society, whether it's prison or even just, you know, living off the grid for a while.
Yeah, for sure.
All those little changes add up.
Totally. So it's like they come back and it's not just a different place, but it's like a whole different world almost.
Exactly. And then, like, imagine trying to rebuild your life with that feeling on top of the stigma of having a record.
Yeah.
It's a lot, more than just catching up.
You can really hear it in Darren's voice, you know, like he's been out for 8 years, but there's still this sense of not being totally settled.
Right.
And it really hits home that prison isn't like a pause button. It's, I don't know, the impact of it just keeps going.
Oh, absolutely. The ripple effect is huge.
Later in the video, he talks about this run-in he had with this woman, Danielle Lowe.
Okay, yeah.
And it really got me thinking about how, like, relationships and past experiences can be these huge obstacles when you're trying to make a fresh start.
For sure. That social and emotional baggage doesn't just disappear, right?
Definitely not. And he's upfront that he's sharing his side, but you can tell there's this whole history, you know? Like, family stuff, bad blood, going way back.
Deep-seated stuff.
Yeah, and it's in that context that this incident happens. He says she almost hit him with her car.
Okay, so you've got this situation where, like, just understanding the backstory is crucial, right? Because everything's loaded with all this past tension.
For sure, for sure.
We only have his perspective, but it shows how past actions can really follow you, even if you're trying to move forward.
It's like he can't escape his past, you know, even if he wanted to.
Absolutely. And it can make even the smallest interaction feel so much more loaded.
Exactly. Like if someone already sees you a certain way, it's hard to change that perception.
Oh, it's incredibly hard. And it can feel like you're constantly fighting an uphill battle.
And that's what happens with Danielle Lowe, at least according to Darren. He says she went to the cops and made up this whole story to get him in trouble, like to violate his parole.
Wow. So, again, we're seeing how his past is used against him, even if it's, you know, potentially untrue.
Right. It's his word against hers, but because of his history.
It's immediately weighted differently.
Exactly. Though he does say he has video that he recorded the encounter on his phone because he was worried something like this might happen.
So he was aware of that power imbalance from the get-go, huh? But even with proof, like...
that might not be enough.
Right. Yeah, it's a difficult situation.
It's like, even if you try to do the right thing, the past can still come back to haunt you. And it makes you wonder, like, how much does your word even count for when you've got that kind of baggage?
That's the heart of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Trust, rebuilding that is so fragile, takes so much time and effort.
And this is where Darren's whole thing about snitching and street code comes into play.
Oh, right.
It's like he's constantly trying to figure out who's legit, who he can trust.
Because in that world, trust can be a liability.
Totally. And it's almost like he's operating under a totally different system of justice.
Well, that's legal cynicism, right? Where certain communities have this ingrained distrust of the legal system.
Yeah, like they've been let down so many times that they've got their own code.
Exactly, and it can create this cycle of, silence and mistrust.
Wow. It's a lot to unpack. And that's what really got me. It wasn't like he was glorifying that street life or anything.
Right.
If anything, he made it sound terrifying. Like all that paranoia, looking over your shoulder, never knowing who to trust.
It's a survival mechanism, yeah. But man, it comes at a price.
Mm.
Always on edge, questioning everyone. It wears you down.
No kidding. And it really makes you think, how do we actually break that cycle? We've talked about how hard it is to come back from prison, the psychological impact, the lack of support, all that past baggage. And Darren's story, it just brings it all together, You can't help but feel for the guy.
Totally. And it underscores the need for a different approach, right? We can't just throw people back into society after years inside and expect them to thrive. They need practical help, sure, housing, jobs, but also that mental health support to help rebuilding those connections.
It's like he's trying to build a new life, but he's still carrying all that weight from the old one. It makes you wonder, what's our responsibility, right, as a society, to make that transition smoother, to actually give people a real second chance?
That's the question, isn't it? It's about shifting our whole mindset, not just punishment, but rehabilitation, reintegration, seeing the humanity in people who messed up, investing in their success, not just for them, but for everyone.
Wow, this deep dive into Darren Gee's story, it's really been eye-opening. So much to think about. The challenges, the systemic issues, the weight of the past really makes you appreciate how much work we still have to do. Thanks for joining me on this one, folks. I hope it gave you as much to chew on as it gave me.